Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Socially Distanced Sports Talk brought to you by your friends at WCBN Sports. My name is Jared Greenspan, and today I am joined by a very special guest. He is the TV voice of the Brooklyn Nets for Yes Network. He does the NBA on TNT, the NFL on CBS, college basketball on CBS, has covered basically everything in his career, and in my opinion, is one of the top broadcasters in the business today. He is Ian Eagle. Ian, thanks so much for being with me today.
Jared, thank you. We could end the interview right there. You call me one of the best, then that's it. I don't have anything more to prove.
I didn't want to humble you too much with my introduction there. So I guess to start this interview, you're coming off really a 4-month hiatus from broadcasting that I would guess is sort of unprecedented for someone like you who is calling games virtually all year round. So I was wondering sort of if you've ever had a layoff like this before, and what have you done to stay fresh and sharp over the course of these last few months?
Yeah, so the quick answer is no. I've never had a layoff of this nature. I'm pretty busy over the course of a season. I probably pulled back more over the last 5 years than I had the previous 20 plus years. But that was just based on trying to find a little more balance in my life. And when I say pull back, I would get back from the French Open for Tennis Channel, usually around June 6th, 7th, in that range. Mm-hmm. And I'd say the last 5 years prior to this one, I would shut it down a bit more than I had previously. And I wouldn't work again, officially work, until the start of the NFL preseason. So first week of August. So it was a pretty good chunk of time, around 6 or 7 weeks of not being on the air. Take an occasional job here and there, or do a charity function or something for Syracuse University, but no heavy lifting per se. So basically, I tried to take that mentality that I've had in the last 5 years and just shift it to a different time period and a different part of the calendar. And it's odd. There's no getting around it. It's been very strange for most people, being taken out of their routine from a sports standpoint. Even if I'm not covering sports, normally I'm watching it and consuming it in some way or preparing for something. And this stretch of time, there's been none of that. So what do you do? How do you stay focused? I've realized that filling a day for me is not a chore. I can still fill a day. I find something to do. I'll go down rabbit holes like anybody else on the computer, and before you know it, you've killed 2 hours watching Sam Cassell highlights. It doesn't seem to make sense, but it does happen. As far as staying sharp as a play-by-play announcer, there's nothing that you can do that would be considered a way to try to make up for it in any way. There's no way to do that. I'm not going to stand on the second floor of my house, look out the window and call play-by-play of cars going by or squirrels gathering nuts. That's not going to serve me well in the long term. But I will review my work, and I will look over some things that I have been working on. With the NBA resuming, I've gotten myself back into that mindset. Again, you can't simulate doing the games, but you can do the preparation, and you can shift your attention and your focus, and you can compartmentalize and get back to the mental state that you need to be in to do this job well and to do it consistently.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the NBA. I know you'll be heading down to Orlando and the bubble soon. Do you know what games you'll be calling and how that broadcast is going to work? I imagine it'll be a bit different than broadcasts that you did before all of this.
It will be different. I do not have a schedule that I could share right now. Eventually, we'll know exactly which games we're covering and which nights we're covering them. I just know, for me, the way I'm attacking it is I'm preparing for all 22 teams. So I've looked over the notes that I've had over the course of this NBA season. The difference, unlike baseball or the NFL when it does restart, those sports you're starting from scratch. NBA, they had played nearly 80% of their season. So a lot of what I had still applies. You have to make adjustments. There are players that will not be a part of it, injured players, players that have opted out, players that have coronavirus that have elected not to participate. There have been players that have been added, two-way players that have been made whole in the NBA, where their contracts are now NBA deals, and they're now participating as an NBA player down in Orlando. So you have to make adjustments to the boards that you make and the charts that you prepare. But as far as calling the games and the rudimentary act of actually doing the play-by-play, not much changes. We're not going to be courtside. We will be elevated, maybe 15 rows up. So that's a little bit of an adjustment. Not as much for me because I do local broadcasting with the Nets. A number of locations around the NBA that are non-national, you're higher. You're at the top of the lower bowl. So 5, 6 arenas around the NBA, that's happened. It happened initially with radio, and now we're seeing slowly TV broadcasts are being put upstairs, so to speak. So that part won't be a huge adjustment. Obviously, it's better being up close, getting the nuances of the game and catching little things that happen over the course of a game that maybe your eye catches, but a camera person or a director or a producer doesn't see. No fans. That's going to be an adjustment. Just the natural energy that you use. It's a compass. You feed off it. You tailor your calls based on how loud the crowd is or sometimes how low the crowd is. So that's going to be a change, but these are things that are certainly feasible to handle. And for me, I will be doing some games remotely as well on the net side, the scrimmage games and then playoff games moving forward. And that's different. You're not at the venue, so you are limited to only what you can see in that box in front of you on the TV screen. And maybe you take less chances with your play-by-play. You have to play it a little more conservative. And you realize that you can't speculate on things that you don't know. And normally in an arena, you can just look for yourself. Now, unless the camera is showing it, you don't know. You don't exactly know what's happening. So you pull back, you wait a beat. Even your identification of players might be a little bit slower compared to something that's happening rat-a-tat-tat in front of you. Again, if this is the hardest part of the job, I think most broadcasters will be able to handle it and will be thrilled just to be calling live action in any form.
Let's jump ahead and talk about your career a bit, and I guess your roots, so to say. How old were you when you realized that you wanted to be a sports broadcaster and that this was something you wanted to make a career out of?
I was 8 years old, 1977. I remember it very well because I actually pulled each of my parents aside separately to tell them that this is what I wanted to do for my career. And both of my parents said, well, then that's what you'll do. Like they were so encouraging and open to it that empowered me. I started believing that, well, then that's what I'll do. Both my parents separately, it's not like I sat them down together. I just mentioned it in casual conversation. And both of them said, well, great, then you'll do it. So that's very much a confidence builder, certainly at that stage of your life. Now, my parents were entertainers. They were not normal 9-to-5 workers. So maybe they saw outside the box a bit. My dad was a comedian, an actor, a musician. My mom was an actress and a singer. And in their view, that was very attainable. Even in 1977, when most people would have said, what are you talking about? You're not going to do that. they felt that I could do it. So even
Mm-hmm.
though I didn't really do anything about it, to
Right.
be perfectly frank, Jared, there was no outlet to do it other than calling games with baseball cards on my bed, or when I
Mm-hmm.
went to play 3-on-3 with my friends doing play-by-play. Here comes Eagle driving down the middle. Oh, layup is good. And my friend telling me, hey, shut up. That's annoying. It probably was annoying, but that was the extent of it until I got to Syracuse. I got to college in 1986, and I got very serious about it.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like getting all that experience at Syracuse? A school, obviously, the Newhouse School is pretty well known for churning out sports broadcasters, and then Syracuse has the athletics comparable in a
Yeah.
way that Michigan does that are there to broadcast.
Well, I think the thing that stuck out initially for me, the reputation of the school was impeccable. So you had a lot of students that had an aptitude for this and had a real passion and interest in it, all coming together and with a purpose. So it wasn't just this lark that students showed up and like, oh, wow, college radio, let me try that. No, they went there with the idea that they wanted to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that competitive spirit was actually eye-opening and gave students there a dose of reality. You felt that it was going to be competitive when you got out of school. Well, it was competitive when you were there because there were a bunch of kids that wanted to do the same exact thing. And a lot of them had ability and talent. So that whole process ended up being very true to life in many ways. So when I got out of Syracuse, when others are shocked, not as much now, I think there's a realization now that it's a very competitive field, but back then there was still a little bit of mystery around it. You know, I graduated in 1990, so 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And while there were people that were interested in sportscasting, I don't think most really knew the path. They didn't understand the formula. I'm not even sure there is a formula today. You have to have ability. You certainly have to do your best to network and try to find opportunities. And you've got to be willing to say yes to anything that comes your way. It's not much different than it was 30 years ago. Now there are more outlets to do it. There are more ways in which to do it with a laptop, with a camera, with a microphone. You can build your own home studio. Back then, you had to be a little bit more creative in figuring out ways to do it. But more than anything else, more than the classes, more than even just the radio station, college TV station, I just think the natural competitiveness of the field within the university was very much a appetizer for you to understand that eventually this is how it is. This was realistic enough for you to gather the idea that, hey, this isn't going to be easy. You're going to have to really work for this.
Mm-hmm. And so you, out of college, you work at WFAN for a few years. For those watching now who don't know, flagship radio station in New York, really centered about sports. And then you're able to land, I guess, your first real play-by-play game with the Nets, the New Jersey Nets at the time.
Yeah.
Is there a backstory to how you were able to land that job?
Yeah, I'll give you the shortest version that I can, but the year was 1994. I saw a column in the New York Post written by Phil Mushnick, who's still writing for the Post today, media columnist, and in it, buried in it, not a lead part of the story, just a note, was that the New Jersey Nets are making a change at the radio play-by-play position. Longtime play-by-play announcer Howard David has moved on, and no announcement as to who will replace him. And that was in June of 1994. I want to say late June as well. So I see this in the newspaper. I try to figure out who I know that would have any more insight. I call two people at that point. One was Russ Salzberg, who worked at FAN at the time and was the longtime anchor at WWOR Channel 9, still occasionally doing radio stuff here in New York. And Don Sperling, who at the time worked for NBA Entertainment as one of their heads of production, and now is a vice president with the New York Giants, working in their production department. And really, I just wanted information, if they knew anything. They both came back and said the same thing, that they talked to their people over there. They said nothing has been determined yet. They have been talking to people about the position, and that you should reach out to a person there by the name of Amy Shear, who was the director of broadcasting, and inquire. So I did. Called her up, got her on the phone, told her who I was. She said, yeah, I'm familiar with you. I know your work. She said, look, we're deep in this process right now. I got to be honest with you, but if you want to get a tape to me, I would bring it over today. I said, well, yeah, I'm going to do it. I was living in Manhattan, 85th and 2nd. I was recently married, had gotten married a year earlier. I knew nothing about the state of New Jersey, nothing. I grew up in Forest Hills and Queens, and I knew that there were jug handles in New Jersey, that you had to make a right to get left. That was basically my knowledge base. I knew very little. So I drive out there to Rutherford, East Rutherford, and I drop off a tape. My tape was a college tape. It was from my senior year of college. I found some stuff on a cassette, dubbed it over to a new cassette, and it was a Syracuse Seton Hall game from 1990 at the Meadowlands, where the Nets were playing at the time. So I thought that was good karma. I would give her some play-by-play from that game. It was a Seton Hall last-second win. Player by the name of Ollie Taylor hit a buzzer beater against a very good Syracuse team, Derek Coleman and Billy Owens and Stevie Thompson and David Johnson. Really good team. All of those were NBA players. So I give her the tape. I meet her in the lobby. She comes downstairs to meet me. We talk for about 10 minutes, hand her the tape. She said, look, I'll let you know. I get a call the next day. She said, I really liked it. I liked what I heard. She said, I played it for my boss, Jim Lamparello. He liked it. I'm like, oh my God, this is tremendous. She said, we just want to hear some more recent stuff. She said, do you have any more recent stuff? I said, oh yeah, I've got more recent stuff. I didn't have any recent stuff. That was the most recent stuff I had. She said, all right, great. Can you get me some more recent stuff? How about tomorrow? I said, okay, yeah, tomorrow. I hang up the phone. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I called a buddy of mine at NBA Entertainment and asked him, hey, could I go to the studios in Secaucus, New Jersey? So here's another New Jersey site that I have to somehow navigate. Could I come in and just call play-by-play off of a screen, and maybe we add some crowd noise to it? He said, yeah, we can do that. We could set you up in a room. Yeah. So I did. Drove out there. I called a Net Nick playoff game from 1994. And it was the one game the Nets won in that series. Again, thinking karma. So I called a half by myself. Tape, dubbed it, brought it over to Amy Shear, dropped it off, same deal. She met me downstairs, and that was that. She called me the next day. She said, hey, we really liked what we heard, and our team president wants to interview you. John Spoelstra, the dad of Eric Spoelstra, Miami Heat head coach. I said, wow, incredible. When? She said, we'll do it early next week. I said, I had nothing to lose. I said, Amy, let me ask you, how many people are being considered at this point? She said, it's down to you and one other person. I'm like, whoa. This all happened within 5 days of seeing it on a Monday and talking to her now, that final conversation on a Friday, setting up an interview for the next week. I show up for the interview. I had heard that I asked people around about John. They said he's a really sharp guy, interesting, and a little different, a little quirky, but in a good way. I went, okay, I can do quirky, no problem. So we go in, I meet with him. I feel 5 minutes in that we're hitting it off. He's laughing at some of my jokes. We're getting one another. And we end up talking for about 40 minutes. I gave him background on who I was, what I was all about. He gave me background on who he was and how he got to where he currently was. And right at the end of the interview, I took a little bit of a risk. And I looked him in the eye and I said, hey, look, John, I don't know which way this is going to go. I said, this is the part that I do know. I said, I really believe I'm going to be successful in this industry. And I had already been doing well at FAN, hosting talk shows and updates. And I was the pre and post game host of the New York Jets. I said, I think I'm going to do well in this business. If you hire me for the rest of my career, you will have been the one that gave me that first chance at play-by-play. And I saw him smile a little bit, like a wry smile and a nod. And I realized at that point that it went the right way. Like that could go one of two ways. Either the person interviewing you says like, what the hell? I don't know. But no, it went the right way. My wife and I went on vacation. It was our 1-year anniversary. We went to San Francisco later that week. So we went for a week. This is pre-cell phone.
Right.
I call into my machine 2 days into the vacation. So let's say we had that meeting on a Tuesday. Mm-hmm. We leave on a Wednesday, call into my machine, get a message on Friday, message from Amy Shear, call me when you get a chance. I call her and she told me that I had the job. So less than 2 weeks from seeing this note in a newspaper column to getting the job and changing my entire career. It was pretty wild.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious as to, sort of jumping out a little bit, I'm curious as to what your preparation is like. Let's go with an NFL game, because I know obviously preparing for the broadcast is a large part of the broadcast itself.
Yeah.
So if you have an NFL game on Sunday, could you walk me through a bit what you do in advance of that?
Yeah, you start hitting the books Monday at 8 a.m. So you call a game on Sunday, you get home at whatever hour, depending upon where your game is. If it's in Baltimore, you got a better shot of getting home for dinner than you do if it's in Houston, or if it's in Minnesota, or if it's in Kansas City, or if it's in LA, you're taking the red eye and you're walking in your house the next day at 7 a.m. But Monday morning you start, and the bare bones part of the job is what we call a board, a chart.
Yeah.
I didn't bring any with me. I probably should have thought to bring some down here. I'm in my wife's office. My office is on the other side of the compound. But basically, I'm laying out on a chart, offense, defense, doing it by hand. For me, I still do it by hand. I don't wear it as a scarlet letter. I just believe that that's what works best for me. Most of the younger guys and even a lot of the older broadcasters now do it via computer, or they have boards made for them. For me to get the information inside my head, it's still important for me to write it out. So I'm setting up one side of the board like you would look at an offense. Offensive line, quarterback underneath it, running backs behind the quarterback, wide receivers off to the sides, kicker, punter in the corner. On the other side of the board, defense, starting with the defensive line, then the linebackers, then the secondary, building up. So the goal is to have the Pittsburgh Steelers on one side, the Baltimore Ravens on the other. You've got the Steelers offense at the bottom. You have the Ravens defense at the top, and then you flip it, and it's the exact opposite. So you can see the matchups on your board. Ultimately, how much of that am I using over the course of a game? 10%, 15%. The reality is you have to get it inside your head. So any way and form that it takes for you to get it inside your head, that's the key. Then I'll have a separate chart with just notes for each team and things that are usually appropriate for game day, not stuff that's old by the time you get to Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You want stuff that's pretty fresh, that's pretty new, something that's going to illuminate a viewer, and something that can advance a story. Then I'll have a separate sheet with just the interviews that we do with the players and coaches. We'll get the head coach for an interview. We'll get the quarterback. We'll get another offensive player. We'll get 2 defensive players for each team. And the goal there is to, again, get fresh material, get stuff that hasn't been in the newspaper or on television the entire week. So something that can open up the lines of communication with your analyst. And all of that put together, you still got to call the play in front of you. You still have to be accurate in what you do, and you have to be timely, and you have to be energetic, and you have to be a traffic cop because you're wearing a headset and there's a million things going on and a producer is in your ear. And all of that is really exciting. And I think it's probably why I got into the business. Just that feeling, that jolt of adrenaline that you get when you go on the air for a Sunday afternoon game. And, prior to the pandemic, 65, 70,000 people in the seats and everybody locked in on television. That's a really fantastic way to make a living walking that tightrope every single week.
You call a lot of different games on a lot of different networks, which certainly comes with you're working with a lot of different analysts.
Yeah.
When I watch your broadcast, one of the things that stands out to me is that you always seem to mesh well, whether you're working with Sarah Kustok or Bill Raftery. There always seems to be good chemistry. Do you have any tips for maybe younger broadcasters at the lower rungs of the business on how to develop that chemistry with their color guy?
Yeah, it really does start off the air. I do believe if you have a breakthrough off the air with legitimate friendship, it translates on the air. But not everybody has time, and not everybody has the type of personality to make that happen. Mm-hmm. The way that I've always viewed it, and I figured this out pretty early in my career, if I make them look good, it helps the broadcast. If I put them in a position to succeed, it helps me. If we sound good together, that's much better than me sounding good and them sounding just okay. The goal is that we sound good, that the audience likes us, that the audience can relate to both of us or 3 of us in some cases when it's a 3-person booth. If it's, I like this person, I don't really like that person, or I don't like that person, but I like, then we've got a problem. Then we're not doing our job correctly. It's supposed to feel like, as a viewer, that you're part of it. I know some have said, oh, it's almost like eavesdropping. No, it's not eavesdropping. You want them to feel engaged in what you're saying. So if your banter is standing out in a way that someone can relate, if it resonates with someone because they have been in those kinds of conversations, then usually at the end of the broadcast, when they turn the TV off, they say, wow, I really enjoyed that. So I've just tried to really be a good teammate more than anything else. And I do my best to make sure that the person I'm working with can trust me more than anything else. I mean, that's true really in every walk of life. I don't care what job you do. the goal is to get to a point where your boss trusts you, and the person that sits next to you trusts you, and the person that you occasionally work with trusts you. That's such an important word. And when there's trust, then you can really go places that maybe others can't go, because they know that you're going to get them to the right place and then pivot to the next place and then work your way to the other place. If the trust isn't there and you start going somewhere and the analyst turns to you like, whoa, I'm out. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't want any part of it. Well, then you're going to have bigger issues and bigger problems. So that's probably the simplest way to put it. But in the larger picture, you really have to actually find common ground. You have to find commonality. You have to be a good conversationalist, and you have to be inherently curious and interested in what the other person has to say. If the broadcast is I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk, it's not going to work. At some point that gets old. It has to be shared conversation. And if you're having shared conversation, I think more often than not, people are attracted to that.
Mm-hmm. So winding down here with one question that maybe more than the rest I've wanted to ask. So I know in broadcasting, just as in other industries, you've got to work your way up. And you mentioned early on that if someone comes to you asking you to, like when you were younger and getting your way into the industry, someone came to you and asked, can you call this? You're not going to say no. So have you ever broadcasted an event that was, I guess, obscure, or something that when you were calling games or wanted to call games that you never imagined that you would be there calling this event?
Yes, absolutely. And it's happened more than once. The first instance for me was 2 years into my CBS career. So 2000, I got a call from someone in the talent department asking, this was the question. It was laid out to me this way. Phone rings, I pick it up. Hey, Ian, it's Amy Sackler from CBS. She used to work there. She doesn't work there anymore, many years ago. I said, hey, Amy. She said, you do boxing, right? I mean, that's a leading question.
Right.
I said, yeah, I do the hell out of boxing. Absolutely. So great. We have 4 fights coming up. Dan Deerdorf was supposed to do all 4 of them, but he had 2 conflicts. So Terry Ewert, our executive producer, decided, no, let's just get one voice for all 4. And here are the dates, and you're in. I'm like, super. So I hang up the phone, and I think to myself, what just happened here? So she told me who the producer was going to be, Mike Arnold, who is a director at CBS, but has a background in both. He actually directs the Super Bowl for CBS, so a big-time director. This is, again, 20 years ago. And I knew Mike a little bit. So I picked up the phone. I called him. I said, Mike, are you producing this thing? He goes, I am. I'm producing this thing. He says, how much boxing have you done? I go, I've done no boxing whatsoever. He goes, ooh. He says, well, how can I help you? I said, just send me tapes of previous boxing broadcasts on CBS. He sent like 90 hours of tapes. This is still VHS time. So I just started watching them, and I started literally jotting down the nomenclature for boxing and building a glossary of terms. And I was a fan of boxing, so I certainly had an idea of how everything worked. But there are nuances that unless you follow every day that you just don't know. So even watching the broadcast back, and they were mostly Tim Ryan and Gil Clancy. Those were the 2 guys that did it for many years at CBS, and they had formed a really good partnership over time, picking up the pacing and how to push it, when to push it, when to pull back, all of that. It was like a graduate level course that I had to take, and I had about a month to do it, about a month to prepare. So I'm ready to go. I called Bob Papa, who we know as the voice of the Giants. He's been a longtime voice in boxing. At the time, he was doing some stuff for HBO After Dark boxing. And I just asked him, how do you prepare? How do you do your charts? He said, come meet me. He lived in New Jersey. Come meet me and I'll show you what I do. And that's where friendship comes into play, and someone who's giving and is willing to share, just like I would be. So I met him a few towns over, showed me his charts. He said, hey, take this one with you. I do need it back, but take this one with you so you can use it as a guide. Great, I did. I formed a lot of what I did off of what he did. Then I added a few things that I needed that he didn't have, some things he had that I didn't think I needed. And I show up, I fly to Vegas for the first fight. It's Obed Sullivan against David Tua, heavyweight fight in June of 2000. I get to Vegas. It's the day of the fight. And my executive producer at the time, Terry Ewert, is there for a convention. He calls me that morning. He says, hey, I want to take you to lunch. Okay, I'm going to lunch with Terry. We sit down for lunch. It's at the MGM Grand. He had a chicken Caesar salad. I had chicken wings. I'm not the best eater. I eat like an 11-year-old child. And I'm eating my wings. He's eating his chicken Caesar salad. And he says, and I've been waiting for this question now. He says, what's your boxing experience? Now, what am I going to do? I'm not going to lie. Like, the fight's happening. I'm doing this thing. There's nobody else there. I'm doing it. I said, well, you know, Terry, it's interesting you bring this up. I've never done a fight. And he says, really? He said, yeah. I said, look, I want to be honest with you here. I've never been to a fight, which was true. I had never been to a fight. And now I actually see like little beads of sweat forming on his upper lip. He says, really? I said, look, I want to put all my cards on the table here, Terry. I've never been in a fight, which wasn't completely true. Like in fifth grade, I still to this day have no idea how it happened. I was roaming the hallways and a friend of mine, Scott Bingham, came up to me. And he said, hey, I heard you're fighting James Schneff after school. I was like, really? Am I? I had no idea. Who set this up? Who's the promoter? And I had to fight this guy after school. I walked out. I was wearing winter gloves. It was snowing. I closed my eyes. I threw a punch. I connected. He went down. I walked home. Like, that was the end of it. But anyway, yeah. So he says to me, really? What are you doing here? I said, no. I'm prepared. I've watched hours upon hours of boxing. I have a good feel for it. He went, okay, but I could see a little bit of worry. So we go to do the fight later that night. David Tua knocks out Obed Sullivan in 2 minutes and 28 seconds. Mm-hmm. But there was an undercard, so I ended up calling 12 rounds of an undercard. And the one thing that struck me, so I show up ringside for it, and I had 2 cups of water. And I put my cups of water down, Jared, and I'm looking up and down to other media members and judges, and they all have their cups of water, but they have a piece of paper over the water. I'm like, that's a weird boxing thing. I've never seen that in my life. And then when David Tua started wailing on Obed Sullivan in the opening minute, right in my vicinity, and bodily fluids started flying, not just onto my shirt, but right into my water, is when I realized, oh, that's why you cover the water. So I do the fight. Yeah, I do the fight. Terry was in the truck. I see him after the fight. He comes walking out. He says, were you pulling my leg? You've called boxing before. I was like, no. And that happened for me with track and field. Never done that. I called 8 straight NCAA track and field championships. I had never been to a track and field event in my life. Volleyball, same deal. Golf. This is going to amaze people, Jared. Yeah. The first golf event I was ever assigned, I got a call from CBS saying, hey, look, we're doing a secondary feed at the Masters for Amen Corner. we'd love for you to be the play-by-play announcer. I said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And I did it. First golf event I had ever attended in my life. So you do what you got to do.
And we will end on one last quick question. When you look back on your career, which has now spanned running on 3 decades, is there a particular game that stands out to you as, I don't know if favorite is the right word, but just memorable?
I mean, there are a number of them, Jared. There are personal ones that probably have more meaning to me just based on circumstances, and there are professional ones. You know, of the bigger events, the Butler Duke game, the national championship game where Hayward had a chance to win it. I called that on the world feed. That ball goes in, probably goes down as the greatest upset in sports history and maybe the greatest ending. Also, I don't know how much of The Last Dance you watch, but I called that final series, Bulls, Jazz, for the world feed as well. So the Jordan, Brian Russell, jumper, counted right off into the sunset. Those are pretty tough to top. But there have been countless other games that could easily make the list.
Got it. All right, well, that is going to do it for this episode of Socially Distanced Sports Talk. Again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Ian, thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure talking to you. Good luck as the broadcasts resume, and have fun in the bubble, and hopefully we can get more sports coming back in the near future.
Yeah, great to see you, Jared. Appreciate it, bud.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone, and that'll be it until next time on Socially Distanced Sports Talk.